Do you know how to do this, but you have one of these, right?
Yeah, but mine was.
So don't hit low, it's still coming up.
Why am I not getting that?
I was so happy getting a paper copy. Felt like right, you know that.
I'm kind of curious
Yeah,
whether
I
it's
used to
going to
do
work out.
like this.
How are you?
I get it. I don't know work out. Well, I did that here.
Good, my husband.
Drew's afraid of him.
From city manager, probably the chief city manager.
Okay, so let's get everyone back at the dais and we'll get folks sitting down.
Anyway, so
Get
we'll
this
talk
work
down
session
on
going.
that tonight, too.
So Scott, while we're getting the contractor on the line, maybe you can remind us of her name.
Sorry. Her name, it's on the card. It's Joellen.
Joanne.
What is it? Joanne?
Joellen. Hi, Joellen.
Hi, Joellen. You're in the city council chambers.
Hi, how are you?
We're good.
Good. Can you hear Scott?
He's a little light, but I can hear him.
Great. Well, thank you for joining us tonight. We do have a quorum of the council here, and I'm just going to automatically turn it over to administration to lead us through our work session.
Okay, thank you. So Joellen and I spoke this morning. On Friday, we emailed out the updated recommendation from the study, which highlighted the 50th and 65th percentiles. Today, Sam and our payroll actually inputted the actual salaries to try to get a picture of what that looks like as a cost to the city to get to the recommended minimums. I think at the 50th percentile, for one, the data was a lot different than what I had anticipated. You know, you project what you might think certain positions would be high or low, and so when we actually looked at where things sit, it's interesting and challenging. But for the overall direction, I think to get to the minimums, so the first, some things to kind of landmark would be our budget and our current system is already accounted for, right, in the numbers and in the budgeting. So how we do our steps and our increments and all of the annual process, that's already been built into the current next 2-year system. So what we're talking about is, if we're revisiting that discussion and dialogue, how do we implement to get our city to a higher range and more equitable for some positions, and how do we do that in a fair and equitable manner? I don't know if Joellen wants to kind of talk about some of the. So I met this afternoon with Annie, and there's obviously some concerns and some questions, and I don't really have those answers because doing this study is very analytical, and percentiles and how things flesh out is very systematic. So I don't know if Joellen would want to kind of navigate us through a little bit of that, but I think when we applied that, I sent her that updated spreadsheet as well. You're looking at, if we take everybody and cap it, so like the first year maybe there's a cap, so you don't do the full increment in one step. The first year you're looking at, like she said, around $120,000 impact. If you go to the 65th percentile, that's higher, obviously, but it's weird because it kind of stays with those same positions and it pushes those same positions even higher, whereas it doesn't impact the whole group. Does that help you? So it tells me that.
I didn't understand that last bit.
So it tells me that there's a select positions in the city, the way they're ranked and the way that they're comparable to other city or to within equity. Those same positions are low, whether they're 50th or 65th percentile. very few additions when you go up to the 65th percentile as a whole than just those few that were already askew at 50.
Can you give us an example?
So some good examples, one of the things that was kind of obviously glaring to me was a lot of the severely underpaid positions are positions we currently have vacant. So the deputy fire chief, because we just upgraded the deputy to the chief, the planning position that we have at what we had budgeted and historical where we would pay that, it's severely under market. Some of the, like the executive liaison, if you compare that to other executive liaisons, it's low, but these are all, it doesn't concern me as much at this point if they are vacant, because you're gonna hire new people in, and that's a negotiation and an option to those people. It's not just something where they've been here 10 years and it impacts them. So I mean, I guess, you know, what I would need direction on as we assemble this and move forward, the proposal that I think I liked most was an idea Joellen has about longevity, and that is, you know, you do your normal evaluation and your process as you normally would, but when you do that, if they aren't lacking and being brought up to market, maybe you do a longevity where you do like a 0. So anybody under 3 years maybe does just the normal 1 step like we currently do, but if you have like say 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, you do maybe like a 1, 3, and a 5 step instead of just doing that 1 increment if they're low. So, and that would tenure them out to where if they are low and they are high tenured, a lot of the people that are very tenured are also high in the pay, but we have those that are high tenured that are also very low paid. So what?
Tenured or tenured?
Tenured, so someone that's here, say 25 years, they may or may not be either really well paid or still really low paid. So I think this overall study, you know, there are concerns about the mins and maxes. And I'm not sure how I recommend changes to that without Joellen's direction. So that's kind of it at a bare glance.
Are there questions from the dais? I mean, we can, Joellen, did you is there anything you would like to present tonight?
No, I think I'm more here to answer questions, but I agree with what Scott said. I mean, we talked, and I think he has an implementation strategy. I think, you know, if you could think about compensating your employees above the 50th percentile, you know, we calculated the 50th and the 65th. It's not that much of a difference in the long run. So it sends a very positive message to your current and future employees that you want to be an above average payer.
Okay.
So
I'm gonna get
that's
questions.
really something to consider. If you stay at the 50th percentile, you may or may not be at average. You may be above or below average. But if you move a little bit higher up, you're sending that very positive message, and maybe that will help with retention as well.
Thank you.
And then the other thing that Scott said, on an implementation strategy, you know, looking at some of your long-term employees that may be falling at the bottom end of the scale, that's been recommended, and maybe trying to do something with them would also send a very positive message. And I'm happy to continue to work with the city, you know, to do that. I told Scott that this morning, as you implement, you know, I can stay behind the scenes and continue to have conversations, and I'm happy to do that.
Okay. Questions? Did you want to start, Councilmember May?
Sure, I'd be happy to. Do we have any information in this wage study or in our city at present about the cost of turnover?
I don't know that we have any analytics specifically about what it costs to hire and retain and recruit new talent. Obviously, that is a very important thing to consider when you're looking at the overall compensation package and philosophies. You know, the longer you retain and have quality employees, the less it costs you in the long run. And I know that Pat we talked a little bit about police officer hiring. That's a national issue right now. There's a lot of places doing bonuses and contractual things where they have a contract for, say, 3 years and they give a hiring bonus and it's prorated if they leave. I think the current fee to go through the academy is extremely expensive and the city is paying that.
It's 25, isn't it?
I think it's 25,000 is what we paid for, I don't know if that's 2 positions or just one.
One, I thought.
It's relatively expensive. So obviously, if you were to pay the employees, not all employees are gonna leave just because of pay issues, obviously, but if you were to retain those, that is an issue to them, and you have more longevity, there's a cost savings there versus turnover. But we didn't have any specifics in the data or in the study that Joellen examined.
Okay, I appreciate you telling sort of the philosophical and just having run a city for a while stance on all this. Thank you.
Are there any further questions? Yes, Councilmember Senga.
Sorry I'm late.
That's fine, thank you.
I was just curious, how do you think that we would rate with our turnover rate? Do you think that's high? Do you think it's low, median?
I don't think the city alone is high in turnover. I think Seward and the community has a lot of people that come and go, and that's part of the culture. I can't explain that. It's interesting to me. I would say in my tenure, the short time that I've been here, 9 months, I've seen 40% of our FTEs turn over, but there were a lot of retirements. There were a lot of people, the husband or wife, finished college and they relocated. So, it's not really, it's hard to pin that down to why. And we do have an unusually high amount of turnover in general. So I think, any way we can address that helps. But I think that's part of the community. I mean, the employers here, I think in general, see that housing issue. I would like to see that reduced, obviously, and fill our staffs. I mean, we continuously have had, 5 to 6 to 8 vacancies. It's really hard to hire like police and some of the positions, the planner. I don't know that that's not being filled just because of pay, but obviously with any position, if you pay considerably more than the average, you probably can get more interest than average. I don't know if that's always the right direction to go. I mean, we want people that want to be here and pay them the fair, equitable amount that makes them happy and that we can be happy paying them. So I think that's part of the study, is trying to look at the analytics and determine, are we off? Are we, some may be high and some are obviously low. So I think going through this evolution is good on many different levels.
I have another question, but I'll wait to jump in if there's questions. External equity. So will external equity go away once we, kind of true up to what the position should be paying?
So I would like to see that eliminated and taken off the books for the employees we have. I think putting everyone back into the equations and having a more prescribed way of dealing with that, because external equities, it kind of undoes the whole meaning of doing a process like this. If you give someone 10% external equity for $50,000 pay, that's $5,000 increase. That's 10% is, in the job market, that's pretty high. If you do that at hiring, I think that maybe makes sense if it's really necessary, but I think that it kind of undoes the balance. I think people that have external equity and it's annotated on their file and everything, I think I'd like to see that go away and get everybody kind of back to where they belong, and it's not really a placeholder or something like that.
Great, and then that's what I wanted to hear, because I think we should be paying positions correctly, and then we don't have to have any discussion or have the wage committee meet and have it be subjective. Like if we're going to go through and look at classifications for these positions, and we should be at a point where we can just honor that moving forward. The other question I had is, and Joellen, this might be also a question for you, because I know potentially not all the current job descriptions were provided to you. So are we at a point where we're totally done, or can we make sure everyone's current job description was provided to you?
So, for purposes of doing our analysis, we relied on the questionnaire. And the questionnaire asked employees to define their job, tell us their essential functions, and then they were asked to respond to 9 questions that then allowed us to value the job in your classification plan. So education, experience, and a bunch of different factors. So if there wasn't something available, we were still able to learn what people did. I think on the moving forward, if you don't have job descriptions, the questionnaires that the employees filled out would allow us then to create them for you. So our analysis was done based on job functions, regardless of whether or not we had a job description.
Okay. And then this might be peripheral, but I think we should also take this opportunity to look at the current structure of the wage committee. Because I don't know how successful that actually is with timeliness of meetings. I don't know. I can speak because I don't know who's on the wage committee, so hopefully I'm not hurting anyone's feelings in the room. But, I don't know, if those folks might be good in what they do, but none of them are HR experts with the same expertise as Joellen. So they're being asked to do something that probably is not in their wheelhouse and could depend on personalities or whatever the situation is. No offense to anyone in this room. So I think within this, when you bring this back to us, we should have a way, a protocol and procedure for how you, not speaking to employees, but your plan for how to manage this moving forward. And maybe that's having someone on consultation to look when there's questions or job changes. So I don't know how you feel about that.
So, I guess, part of that is being the chief personnel officer is understanding my philosophies. I've had, everywhere I've managed and been, I've had employees that come to me and they're, like that threatening, hey, I have this job that's going to pay me so much better. And I'm like, you should go pursue that. And you can't always compete with the outside, right? But I also feel like if they're leaving solely because they aren't being equitably paid, that we should address that as well.
Yeah, and I'd like to get there before they're leaving.
Right.
Like if there's a change in job duties or restructuring, or like in the clerk's office, they've taken on different duties. And even with the clerk's office, I don't think that it's necessarily appropriate to have her positions go to the wage committee, because she is the boss of her department. Like her employees answer to her as opposed to the administration structure. So I'd like to have an avenue that, even if we still continue with the wage committee, for the clerk's office to have an avenue to get things changed and done within our department in a different way. And I didn't talk to the clerk about that. I don't know how I might be stepping in and she doesn't agree, but that would just be my opinion.
Yeah, and so just for transparency as well, every action that I have taken since I've worked here has been documented.
Yeah, oh yeah.
They had to look at the code, the personnel officer vetted it, he said, you have to do this, or you have to go to the wage study, and I don't know if that's good or bad, but I have never gone to the wage study because I conform to the requirements within the regulation. If that was warranted, I would do it, but knowing that this was happening as well.
Right.
I felt like, the system kind of gets reset, and I personally like how we have the progression, how we have the steps, and it's kind of like, you have to do an eval and they have to be performing. And then the employee kind of knows, hey, what's expected and where can I go? The city knows how to budget and how that may look for the future, but I think what's hard is where we sit with a study like this, there are some larger catch-up factors, and I think, this study is getting us current. It doesn't necessarily say, we do it and we're good for 20 years. It gets us to where we should be, and then we have to look at that philosophically and kind of maintain it. But I do like our current structure, how you're placed and how you get progressives, and how the job description is generally tiered towards what can the employee do to earn that. I like that format.
No,
think
I
it-
like the ranges and the steps. I think that's good to keep. I know Joellen had some questions, but I guess it's when there's changes or looking at other positions.
And I think,
Well, and I can add to that, you know, and I'm sure you probably don't recall when I was there in November, but, you know, the city now has the tool to maintain the system. So if for some reason a job duties change and it could potentially affect the level of the job, you have the questionnaire to go back and look at what was filled out initially, see if anything's changed, and then the city can look at that and say, oh yeah, it does affect the level of the job. So going forward, you can maintain your classification plan because you have the tools to do that.
Okay.
And you can also maintain the compensation plan by, you know, annually surveying the other communities that we got information from to make sure that we're, you know, you're staying competitive with the market. And again, you know, when those things come up, if there are positions that have changed, and, you know, for a year or so after the study's implemented, I'm available, just ask me questions, and I can, and, you know, the city can go through and say, you know, the job's changed, we looked at the questionnaire, we think maybe we need to change the level of the job to a different grade. I'm happy to give you some feedback on that.
Okay. Are there any other questions? I was monopolizing. Councilmember Butts?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. It's more of a comment, I think, here too. I think with our turnover rate that we were talking about before too, I'm hoping that we're going to now kind of, in a sense, kind of level off with this one. I think the internal, external turmoils that we've had in the last year or so, I think it's kind of settled down now, and now we have a, you know, we'll be able to kind of have a much more base that people can come off of there too. I think that was one of the problems why we've had so much turnover in the last little while too. There's lots of internal, external forces kind of playing into that one too. So I think that was kind of hard. You can't really take that into effect of what we're doing here with this one. But now that we have a constant administration, constant everything there too, I think that's going to run a lot easier.
If there's no further questions or comments, I'm going to turn it over to the public. Thank you for being patient, for letting us have our questions first. Jackie Wild in the back?
I just wanted to.
So
put it out there.
let me check 1 second. Do you need those folks to come to the dais for the recording, or what would be better?
Just as long as they're loud enough, that's
Okay,
no problem.
thank you. Sorry to interrupt you.
Nobody ever has a problem hearing. I just wanted to put out there that as the planner position has been open, you know, we've advertised countrywide, nationally, but there's 5 positions within Alaska right now that we're competing with on a planner's level, and we're about 28 to 32% below what those planners are making. So I mean, it's huge when you're in a state like this and you're trying to get a planner to come here and they pull it up and they're like, oh, there's 5 other places and they pay me almost 32% more. It's hard.
Patrick?
May I use the podium?
Yes, please, yes.
I guess this would be more for Joellen, but we talked to Scott here recently, and it was talking about the 50th and 60th percentile. Do you guys have the weight study in front of you? Can you go to table 2, range 7?
Oh, no.
No, we don't.
We just have,
Not that whole, no, we don't have that.
Well,
did I
could
bring it?
Describe it to us?
Yeah, we might have it.
I can basically give you the gist of what's going on. So,
Table 2, can you say again what you're referencing? Do?
table 2,
I
range
don't know
7.
that you guys have the full.
we have the comprehensive table.
Oh, that would be probably on page 2 of the laydown.
Okay,
I'm
oh, good.
guessing.
So if you go to range 7,
Okay. Oh, patrol officer, building inspector, journeyman lineman.
exactly.
Yeah,
So-
page 2 of 3. Page 2 of 3. And then it says, it's right here, patrol corporal,
okay.
building
Oh.
inspector, journeyman lineman, patrol officer, and shop foreman.
Okay.
So if you look at this now, if I get you to the middle column, it says salary survey data from the 50th percentile. This is all the cities that Joellen was able to get to respond.
Salary you're looking at the 66,100?
No, there's nothing
No.
there.
No, the
50th.
salary
50th.
survey.
Like for patrol corporal specifically. It's empty,
Okay, so. does it-
deliberately left blank.
50th.
That's what they say in the city documents when there's an empty column. They say deliberately left blank. So you're
No.
saying these are deliberately left blank?
Can I finish? Or-
Yeah, go ahead, please
Okay.
continue.
All right, so if you look at patrol officer, it recommends our salary range at the 50th percentile be from 59,000 to 82,000, and some change, sorry. what we currently make is, if you go over here to salaries, sewer salary range, it says 47 to 69, that's actually $10,000 off. We got a $5 an hour raise from you guys 2 years ago, and that is 57 to 79.
Oh.
Now, what I'm getting at here is if you go over to what she's recommending for that range. Okay, I do have it. Anyway, sorry. If you go over to what the range allows, she's saying the 50th percentile is 54 to 73. That's less than what the externals saying we should have gotten, and it's less than we currently make. If you go to the 65th percentile, it's still less than we currently make, and it's less than the 65th percentile.
It's different on here.
Our numbers don't line
Yeah,
up with what
he's
you're
looking
saying
at
all.
the,
Oh, here on the top.
so the very,
Back to the top.
the very far two are the recommended ranges with the 50th and 65th percentile, if you look at that. And then if you go back, it's the actual data that Joellen,
And everyone in that range, every position, not just the police officers, the building inspector, the joint, or excuse me, and the shop foreman are this similar to that. Well, I take that back. The shop foreman, no? The shop foreman should be making more as well. So in range 7, and I noticed a general trend, I went through all this stuff, it took me a long time. And if you look at, no one makes exactly what the 50th or 65th percentile is according to the ranges or the proposed ranges. They either make more or is proposed to make more or less. Of the ones making more, most are supervisors, I noticed, or non-exempt employees, and the ones making less than the recommended 50th or 65 are all line staff, which would be our members for SBA. And I'm trying to understand where these numbers are, because the 65th percentile from the outside data isn't lining up with the recommendations, and that's what's confusing the heck out of me. And it would cause a lot, like for police officers, we'd go to being the lowest paid, or the next to lowest paid, depending on the 65th or 50th on that list.
So that's a good question. So hopefully it didn't interrupt you, but the question is, so
Oh,
for.
I heard it.
Okay, okay.
You want the answer?
Yeah.
Okay, so, the one thing I do have a question about is the range that I was supplied with is what's in the study. Okay, so for whatever reason, the patrol officer range I have is 47 to 69. So that's the information I received from the city, that's what's in there. But in order to look at a recommended pay range, everything is based on internal equity. Okay, so when you look at the spreadsheet that has just been referred to, the internal equity is the classification plan, which is on the left side of that spreadsheet. It's the position title, it's the new grade, it's the job factor analysis score, the JFA total, and the skill level. So that's what drives your system, is where the positions score in relation to each other in the city of Seward. So I have to look at very particularly how you value your job in your city. So that's why we had the employees fill out the job analysis questionnaire and why we came back and interviewed. The second part of it is then looking at the salary data. And I agree, for the positions in that grade, the salary survey data is showing, if you look at it mutually exclusively, that the range I'm recommending is lower than individual salary survey data. But I'm not looking at it mutually exclusively, I'm looking at the whole entire pay band. And the whole entire pay band is several grades. It's grade, I believe, it goes up to grade 9 and it starts at grade 5. So I have to look at all of the data for the entire pay band, which is called supervisors and advanced technical. And if you look at this pay data for grade 8, which is higher than grade 7, and all of the positions in there, when I average that and look at it, it's actually less than grade 7. So I have to tie all of that together in order to come up with the compensation system for Seward. So I agree, if you look at it exclusively by position, it doesn't seem to make sense, but I don't look at it that way, I have to look at the aggregate. And that's why you have three pay bands. You have the directors and senior managers, the supervisors and advanced technical staff, and then your administrative and technical staff. And I had tied, that's why you have table 3. So if you look at table 3, it shows how I tie all of the compensation together. So the question that comes up is, it's not, look at the salary survey data and it has to exactly match. It is the position classified correctly in the system? That's if you have a concern about the pay range that's recommended, that's what you have to look at. So that's theoretically, that's how you do it. And I agree. If you look at every single data point for the compensation information, it's not exactly going to match the recommended pay range because I have to look at all of the data together. I don't look at it exclusively.
So how do you merge those 2 points together?
The classification and the compensation?
Yeah.
So again, what drives it is the classification. So if you say, yes, all the positions in grade 7 belong in grade 7, then they go there. And if all of the positions in grade 8 belong in grade 8, they go to grade 8. Then I look at what the market is saying you should pay those positions. And in the case of sewers, some of the positions in grade 8, the market's saying you should pay less than the positions in grade 7. Mm-hmm. So I have to take that into account when I'm recommending a pay range. Because, if the positions in grade 8 are saying, based on our analysis of the questionnaire, the employees filling it out, the interviews, that's where those positions belong, then I have to take that into account because your internal equity, your classification plan, the left side of that spreadsheet drives your system. So that's why it doesn't always match. In some studies it's close, in other studies it's not as close. But you have to look at your internal equity. You have to look at that classification plan. So if there's a question of the compensation, then it goes back to the job analysis questionnaire, how it was filled out, whether or not it made sense, as far as how people responded to it, and if it needs to be looked at again.
I had another comment from the public. Go ahead, Patrick.
I guess what I'm getting at is her recommendations with the JQs, and I understand it's based on that study, it doesn't match the market. And it's a significant pay cut. I mean, we had a problem, at least with the police officers hiring them before. And if we go backwards like this, it's going to be worse.
Well, I just have to say is I personally am not looking at cutting anyone's pay within this study. So I'll look to the dais and see if that was anyone's.
That was, that came out already that said that with this study that no one's salary would be cut.
That was my understanding.
Yeah.
Yep, so we won't. Councilmember Lane?
And we're certainly not recommending that. I'm not sure why the pay range I have is different than what was, brought up by the person that was speaking before you asked me to respond.
Okay, thank you. I'll go to Councilmember Buckland.
However, it would put certain positions in a lower pay group or in a lower range. So I think what Pat is saying is that even though you don't plan to cut, you still put that job classification in a lower group. And I think looking at some of the positions from 7 to 8, that's a pretty broad swath of, I don't want to go into specific titles because I don't think that's fair, but maybe certain ones in there could be switched around. If you're talking about equity or a market value in there, then maybe some of the 8 should have been switched around back into 7.
Yeah, but here's where I'm worried, and then I see your hand, you're next once we go through the council comments. Here's where I'm worried. If we as council start changing the results, then but I agree with what you're saying. If there's certain things, maybe before we adopt it, we have our contractor take just a second look at things to be sure.
I'm just concerned that if that, especially in that position when we are concerned expressly about crime and about adding another position in the police department, and especially because of that, I think we're going to end up with another term officer I don't really agree with the term officers because I would like to see more competitive pay for officers that want to invest their time in our community and be a part of our community. So I do see where Pat has concerns about this because it does, I understand the broader picture of everything, but then I'm not a statistician, so it is hard for anybody to wrap their minds around these numbers and how they're classified. But she did just suggest that if we do think that there are different ones, and maybe we just need feedback from the employees about where that was, and then the job classification study needs to be done again or reevaluated, then we can identify those. But if people don't want to speak to that, then, you know, it's hard for me to understand this like as a whole document one, especially when it comes down to individual people, because we shouldn't be thinking individually. But I do see concerns.
That's wise. Ma'am, thank you for waiting. I'm sorry, I don't know your name.
I'm Annie Knight. I'm the APEA employee rep that represents Seward.
Okay, thank you, Annie, for waiting. Go ahead.
I think my question might have just been answered, but Joellen, I wanted to confirm that if we don't concur where a position is currently in a range per what you just shared with us, how would we work with you or with the city to go through this process to make sure that the questionnaire is accurate, or that we are interviewing that people are being interviewed again? How do we work with that? Because my understanding is you didn't get all of the actual position descriptions, but you did go through this questionnaire. So how would that look for the union per se? If we don't agree, how would we have that conversation before having this all adopted, so we don't have to go through negotiation type stuff? You know?
Well, I will defer to the city on that, because I think the city has to lay the groundwork for the relationship with the union. But generally, if you don't agree where a position has been classified, you have to go back to the beginning, because this is based on what the employees told us. And I went through with my colleagues a questionnaire. We interviewed people to find out exactly what they did, and this is how it came out. So the left side of the spreadsheet is what drives the system. Again, the compensation is secondary to internal equity. So the council may remember me saying it's unique to Seward. You know, if we go to Kenai, if we go to any other community in Alaska, the situation is different, because we talked about the town planner tonight, or the city planner, they may want that position paid higher or lower. So it really is unique to Seward. So that's what has to drive the system. So I think what's important is for the city to decide on where they want to be as a payer, how they want to implement, and then the secondary part of it is the implementation, and the city will take the steps to work with the union to implement, and I'm happy to help in that regard. So if there are questions about how positions were classified, Scott and I talked about that, and I'm happy to, if there's adjustments that need to be made, it's on the classification side, not the compensation side. And, if we missed something, or if a position was, if an employee filled out a questionnaire and something was missed, we're happy to work with the city to take a look at that.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to stop for a second. If there's anyone in the public that would like to have the opportunity to speak, we're kind of doing this back and forth thing. Is there anyone else in the back row, please?
Okay, you talk about this grade, which is the determining factor on majority of these decisions. I'm looking at grade 8. One of my supervisors is a harbor worker 3. And down to grade 6, harbor worker 2 is the guys that he supervises. Well, according to your 50th percentile and your salary range, my supervisor is making less money than the guys he's supervising. So there's probably there must be some kind of mistake
A
in the
typo.
way that they type it.
No,
I don't think so. Are we?
No, this isn't really user-friendly. So what they're projecting, so with this, the 8, this is the top line is what they would be projecting. And so if, when you go down to 6, the top line, when you compare those two, the 8 is higher than the 2.
I see what you're pointing at.
Uh-huh. It's right here.
Page 2?
Yeah, table 2, page 2.
I think he's looking at this.
Yeah.
This is 6 right here.
proposed.
6.
I know, he's looking at this.
50 and 65.
Okay, so I was misreading this.
Yeah, that's okay. That's good for everyone to understand, because that's great.
Either.
That's a good question.
But, that is one of the things, and I'd like to refer to my position. I'm not gonna.
So, is there anyone else in the audience that would like to speak? Pat, I'll get back to you, but I just want to make sure. Is there anyone else that hasn't spoken yet that would like to? Go ahead.
I just want to say thank you for considering this. I think this is a really valuable project for the whole city and just for all the city departments. And I know sometimes it gets really difficult and the conversations can get challenging. So I just want to put it out there.
Thank you, Mrs. Kingsland. Councilmember Lane.
Oh, please.
Well, I'll check with the dais. So Pat, I'll go back to Norm and then come to you. Is that okay? Harbor Master Regis.
Councilmember Lane's question earlier about turnover. So the ladies in the office down there in the harbor, we had a lot of turnover. Some of them were leaving because their husbands were leaving, but we had a lot of single ladies that could not make it work because they weren't getting enough pay to pay rent in this town. And that's the biggest thing, and I'm not trying to compare jobs to other jobs in the city, but that job, it needs to go up. I think we can retain, we got some great people right now, we need to retain them. So,
So Harbor Master Regis, could you tell us what range that position is? Is it that administrative assistant harbor? Okay.
Range 3. Wait, where? Grade 3.
Oh, there it
Range
is.
3.
Yeah.
Custodian, DMV, Recreation Administrative Assistant, Harbor. 335 JFA.
It is proposed,
It would go up.
it's proposed, looks like to go up.
It's
Yeah.
and then, go ahead.
She had her hand up first. Jackie.
All I
Jackie.
want to say is, from a person that worked in the harbor for 6 years, I just want to put it out there that I've said from day one, that position should be a reclassification altogether because it shouldn't be under admin assistant. You do nothing that is admin assistant related. You are billing, you're dealing with customer service.
you're never accounting technician.
You're accounting technicians, you're not an admin. And so that's where this comes into play, where if you have a layout from the company that says, hey, this is how this job description is from all their answers of their forms, right? So you got those 3 women answered all 3 forms and all 9 questions. Take that and see if it really does compare to being an admin, or if it's just put under there because that's the title they were hired as.
So there were a few like that in specifically that Joellen and Riley and I talked about with her, and the data drove it, right? They scored through a process. I think that's what was hard for me was seeing that the 6 and the 7, the pay scales were swapped, right? So the lower one was actually a higher initial data, but then I started getting into looking at, I don't want to talk about specific employees, but I look at in Personnel Group 8, you have a correction sergeant and a dispatch supervisor that are both 13 to 15s. But those jobs scored really high because of what they do, right? So, and they're low for their classification as the city. And so there are some of those that kind of rise up and are obvious, but then there's those that, I think that the thing that's difficult in how Joellen assembled it is it does drive off of that JFA total score. And I think if there's a few select ones that are really not vetted where they are, or say like the market is so different, we might have to look at that. But I think in general, it's a very tiered structure, right? You can't have layers lower having a higher range than the one, two above it. So I think, those discussions and vetting that out has to make sense. But for me, it's hard, in looking at the actual pays and the data. There's a lot of surprises there that, obviously I don't want to share that with the whole world.
Yeah.
But I do want to try to make things right. And I think, for the staff and the employees, I think, no one is going to decrease. There are some that would jump up quite a bit. But I think that's where I think we need to have some kind of vetting to have the higher tenured employees that are performing that may be low to give them more than a normal one step. Maybe they get the 1, 3, 5 step jumps. And I think it's hard because you really can't ever evaluate anybody without taking some of the personal bias. I work well with this person and not that person. And some people just perform and some have other characteristics. So it's very subjective in all realms. And I think it's hard being new to the city, and Joellen is outside the city. I think a lot of that vetted out how it should, but now we have to kind of look at that a little closer.
Councilmember Butts hasn't had
I
much.
think I may have asked this question before. In their JFA score, is there something in there that has like potential for injury or the danger side? And I'm not saying any one job from another, but somebody who's working at a desk may not have a potential type of risk as somebody else who's out there doing something with the public or something else like that.
And Joellen would be best to answer that because.
Yes. There is a whole factor on the work environment and the hazards of the job. And I have to say, with the people at your harbor, and believe me, I've worked in coastal communities, but they absolutely had me convinced about snowplowing docks in the dark and how hazardous that could be. So people that have those types of the law enforcement positions, where the call comes in and you have no idea what's going to happen. It could be totally sedentary. It could be, potentially, life-threatening. So yes, that's number 8. There's a question that people had to check. Physically, what do they have to do every day? Do they have to lift? Do they have to crawl? Do they have to scoop? Do they have to stare at a computer? That's the first part. And then the second part of it is the work environment, so are you exposed to the elements, and what other hazardous conditions do you have? And the correlation that has with the federal law, the Americans with Disabilities Act, is in our system. Because if somebody came to the city and wanted an accommodation to do a job, then your job description should be able to tell someone if you can make that accommodation or not. So yes, that has been taken into account in the total score.
Okay, thank you.
Pat?
The one thing I guess I'd like to see more is, and I think I've heard the city manager say and Joellen say before, is if the external market conditions are such that they don't align with the JFQ, we can modify this agreement and not stick to it, because, like I said, that's for everyone in Range 7. It's a hard hit, not just the cops.
Well, I think it is a pay raise, though.
Not for the police officers, it's a pay cut, or at least pay freeze.
Well-
Because the police officers currently top out at $79,000. The reason she doesn't have that information is when they did the $5 an hour raise to police officers, they put a little asterisk next to the range and said $5 an hour raise for all the LE positions. So if she didn't really look down into it, she wouldn't have noticed that. So all the police officer positions are $10,000 more than what's listed there.
Councilmember Lane?
If we're gonna do ranges, then if you're at the bottom of, say you get put in the range, now you're at the top of that range. You have to go to the next range to start getting raises, and I've experienced this throughout. So then you get to the low, then the next year you do reviews. Then you only get a very small increment. So I just kind of go back and forth about this because I understand it's not a pay cut. And also, when you get put in and you're at the top of a range, you look forward at the future and you say, there's not really much chance for me to get my salary to go up because I'm almost at the top of my range. And this is what happens up at Mountain Haven. We have people who've been there a long time they're at the top of it, nothing good is coming their way. So they're just kind of, you're just swimming. And then if you take that and you look at the outside world and you say like, well, in Kenai, where I would be right now is at the bottom of a range. So every year I would get, say, a 3 or 5%. Then that puts us as an employer at a disadvantage in terms of retention. And it was my understanding that at least part of this whole study was about figuring out how to pay our employees enough to keep them so that people can live here and so that we as a corporation can keep our culture and keep our work ethic. So where I am so appreciative for the systematic approach, and at the same time, when the outcome doesn't meet our goal or what we want for our city, then I think we need to look back at the system and see how do we look at this differently again so that we end up meeting our goal. Because that's really what we're here about. We're here about creating internal equity within our organization and making us competitive on the state and hopefully the national level. Otherwise, we will continue to see 40 FTEs in less than a year is a huge percent. Is it 50?
So I guess some of the questions that the city manager came with is if we're looking at salary range 50th or 65th. I would like to look at 65th would be my preference. I'd like the city manager to look at, the steps, some 1, 3, 5 steps. But then there's a couple positions, and here's where I'm at. I mean, we could all on this dais say a couple positions that we maybe want re-examined. But then I'm sure every single city employee would like their job description re-examined, because we all know when we have our heart and soul in our job, we definitely feel like we do as much or more than those around us. So I won't continue my thought. I'll let Mr. Kenny go ahead. Did you have a comment?
I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, you're fine, no.
You said 65th, is that the proposed or the salary survey data?
So when it says salary range 56, and I'm just one person, so everyone will have to say in their dais, but 65th over here would be the proposed of raising. And then just the end of that thought is, I think that whether it changes or not, we should take another look at the patrol officer just with the correct salary data, which I know that that's the second step, but let's make sure that's under evaluation. And a harbor aid assistant, take a look at that again. And I don't know if there's any others that have questions. Again, I think we could probably say all of these, so we have to do this in a way that we're not redoing this whole study.
I'd like to see all the admin assistants on an equal range of 5, because they all do similar work. I know there's different education requirements, but they all do similar work. And we have retention issues with, like you mentioned, the harbor, clerk's office. All of them have retention issues with their admin assistants.
So again, it goes back to those sheets, and we haven't been privy to all those sheets about what's been answered. So I'm going to look to the dais really quick, because I am just one opinion. I want to hear what other folks have, because we need to give a recommendation to administration tonight.
Before you do that, Madam Mayor, one of the things that I think has to be addressed is some positions are significantly out of range. Most of them are vacancies, right?
Higher or lower?
So there's a couple in there that, like, if we were to be in range, like on the planner, it's like an $18,000 increase from what we have in our budget. Mm-hmm. And so to me, like, a person is in a job and they're accepting the pay they're getting. I want to make efforts to get to market, but there maybe a 2-year tier or something, and I need some kind of a cap. So like if someone has a $9,600 change from where they are, I don't know that the city wants to incur that all in 1 year with every position that's going to do that. And so, initially Joellen and I talked, and I thought, maybe like 5,000 or 7, for a $60,000 a year job, a 10% increase, which is huge, would be $6,000. Mm-hmm. I don't know if that would be an arbitrary cap. And then if it was more than that the next year, assuming they're still here, part of my dilemma is and I've had this many times in the past where I had a police chief or I had, Joe employee that retired and I hired a new person that made 15,000 more than the person that just retired after being with me. And that shouldn't happen, right? I mean, that's kind of the point of the longevity and making sure we're accurate. So some of those positions obviously have more to move than others, but the hard part is, and I tried to convey that in the meeting prior to this one tonight, there's several positions that need market adjustment. But that doesn't impact a lot of our tenured employees that aren't necessarily midway into the range. Does that make sense? So like if you're a 20-year employee, which we have some, that's not that common anymore, but there's some 20-year employees that are going to be right at that minimum. And so I think having that 135 ability to the supervisor is going to kind of assist those employees to kind of get what's equitable. So I need some kind of direction on, and if you want to, if you do the whole amount for every budgeted position, it's pretty significant. We're looking at, an overall impact of like $400,000, and I don't know that that's something that's on paper. That doesn't mean that every position is going to be filled, and that, we may hire some. Moving forward, you want your range. So like, we talked a little bit about police officers. I mean, obviously there's a range. I want to make sure that where we are in the current market, that even if you're on the upper end of that, it has to be realistic that it can go, you don't want to have everybody maxed out and nobody gets a raise and everybody is concerned at that. So I think, we need to look at it closer. But I've looked at the ones that are adjusting and some of the stuff, and I think several of the ones that are being adjusted in the data are the ones that also need to. So I don't know, that's a lot to take in, but I do request you give some kind of a cap or direction.
Do you have comments, Vice Mayor?
So you had mentioned earlier, if we're just looking on this paper as it is now, the 50% proposed, it would be about $120,000 bump?
On paper, so if every
paper.
position was put up to the 50th percentile at that 5,000 cap that we had.
So with a 5,000 cap.
So it would be more like 180-ish if we did all of the movement to the full.
So I love the idea of giving, the 65%, or percentile, but where does the money come from? What are we cutting to do that? Because we have our budget, right? And I know we knew this was going to come down.
Yeah.
So we've got to think about, what are we giving up to do this then? Or do we raise our taxes so that we can pay for this, or what, So, I'd love to pay everybody so they could stay here forever, But we have to think about the income part of it too. I just also wanted to interject, my mom, who's almost 90 now, always says, in Seward, people come and people go, but I'm still here. And she's been here for almost 90 years. So there are other reasons for staying in Seward besides pay. I just had to throw that in. Okay.
Councilmember Osenga?
I was just going to say that was going to be my concern, was just if we take a hit like that, how would we do that as far as the budget? And I think I would be in favor of a little smaller steps yearly, kind of to get to where we need to be. So.
Councilmember Butts?
Two things I have here too, and maybe this is an answer that we can help me out here too. When I've had some comments here about our range 5 there too, and our grade, grade 5. We only have data really for 2 positions here, so we don't really have, a lot of these positions are very unique to Seward as compared to any other places there too. So it's kind of difficult as we start to look at some of these here too, because we have so many positions, but only data from 2 different types of positions there too, as we look at that. So maybe that might help us say, hey, maybe we do need to look at maybe a couple of those there too. But my thing is, I just have a question. I kind of, hopefully it's not too broad of a question for everybody, to the city manager. As far as you've seen right now, where's our biggest problem? Retention or recruitment?
Right now it's kind of both, right? So I think if we adjust these salaries and things like Jackie was discussing earlier, the planning position, obviously, if we advertise that more in line with what's recommended here, I think we would get more interest and get somebody hired. But I think the turnover has more to do with just the pay. And I do want to see the employees benefit and to pay more in line with the higher, like we strive for excellence, and we want to kind of show that in how we treat people and how we pay people. But we also expect that. We expect performance and we expect professionalism, and kind of goes hand in hand. So I think a lot of the tenure issues I've seen, obviously a lot of our department heads were maxed out and retired at 30 years, and specific employees went to other organizations, and I think that's going to happen regardless. I think it's hard for me because the people that we hire new, you kind of look at where things are all set up and what makes sense and what's fair and what's equitable. Some of this is adjusting those people that have been here a long time and maybe haven't been placed recently, so it's kind of catching up for some of the.
And no disrespect, but some of the other people who've been here longer, Norm, retention, recruitment, which is worse?
Retention, I think, just from Harbor's perspective, because the people, we got great people down there, but they can't make it on what they're making. They leave. Like I said, some of them left because their husbands went to better jobs out of state. That's one, it's more retention thing. Not paying enough to make the family work too. I don't know the whole situation, but that's, to me, I just think it's.
Pat, you're nodding your head also.
Retain the people you got,
Retention.
because
Mike,
you got some great employees in the city, and you just gotta keep them.
from what you see, Mike, retention, recruitment, what do you?
Yeah, I think it's both. I mean, I don't know if one's up here and one's down here. I mean, and then it just flip-flops every year, case by case, department to department. Like, I don't think there's a correct answer for what they're asking.
Okay.
I also think I also think you see more retention issues with the lower ranks. Like, once you make it to supervisor, it seems like people stay. Like in
Well, yeah, I think that's true across organizations, though. I would say that there's more movement and there's lower. Let me go to Councilmember Bucklawn. You had your hand up?
Yeah, I think this is a great time to talk about maybe amending the budget. I was one of 2 council members who proposed cuts to the budget, and I think we need to think of efficiency and fiscal responsibility, especially on different things. If we want to see, and I would love to see raises, we do need to look at what we're spending. So
I wouldn't say there was just 2 people saying cuts. I think everyone on the dais suggested areas to cut. But what would you suggest to cut currently?
$100,000 for a parking chalet in the, from the Parks and Recs budget. That was one of my proposals. I didn't remember anybody else proposing any cuts for the budgets or
I
amendments
think
to the
travel.
budget.
I proposed
Yeah.
cuts for travel.
I said I was one of 2 council
Okay.
members.
Oh, I didn't know you
Yeah.
were referring to me. Okay,
Yeah.
great.
So I, at the same time, I just think, we raised our estimation on our revenue or our taxes, and we still didn't make up the difference there. So my justification was I identified a place to make $150,000 in cuts where we would have balanced our budget. We still would have had the high revenue and the $150,000 left over. So, excuse me. I'm just saying that maybe it's, I would like to see the raises. I think they're definitely deserved, but we also need to think about efficiency and spending, and where I definitely agree with Councilmember McClure about where the money is going to come from.
So I have a question. When are we going to get our budget books? Do you know?
Question.
Okay. Because when I was doing some comparisons, I had to go back to an old book to
Right.
look at like where the ranges are and stuff. So that's one item. Go ahead.
I had a quick question. In these salaries, what are the retirement and PERS costs and stuff that we pay in? And those would go up proportionally, right?
Correct.
And is
So-
that included in, that's not included?
So,
right?
so to give, this is
Sorry, I meant to
gross
say.
No, that's good.
salaried positions. This isn't, so like when you do increase, the positional pay, you're also matching the retirement portion, FICA, you get into all that additional. So, I mean, obviously, the overtime budgets, you're gonna get less hours because it's at a higher rate when you have raises. It decreases those allotments. So this is just talking general pay. This isn't talking all overall costs. And I do want to point out, so last year, before I was here, to balance the budget, they calculated the unfilled positions, and that was estimated at 250,000. They never touched that. So we had about at least a $250,000 that they didn't actually have any overages on that. So roughly, I mean, if that was good last year, I would assume that's probably a similar calculation this year. So it is budgeting, right? So in all essence, our personnel costs are high, but we're probably in the 80th percentile, mid-80s. We're not at, if we were at 100% budget, obviously, we would be, doing an incremental, we would look at offsetting, and I think we can manage this. I don't think, with our cost savings and vacancies, and, when those 30 or 10-year employees retire, generally, unless, some people would say they hire two people to do their job too. I mean, there's a lot of economics of scale around that.
Yeah, and just to that point, if you don't mind, then I'll call on you, is I think there are still people in the public, which they're not here, and you guys will throw stones at me, but it's fine, I'm not taking offense. But there's members in the public that do say city employees are well compensated, because I mean, not everyone goes through a wage study, so people are just making whatever salary and sewer they're making. But go ahead, Councilmember Lane.
When we first looked at the budget this year, I remember that we had a major deficit. Do you remember that? And then administration came back with some adjustments in revenue, essentially.
So we
remember
started
what
with
that
160,000. The year before, it was well over $1.5 million.
So we were looking at a $160,000 deficit, and then in order to balance the budget, administration brought back $160,000 in proposed additional revenue. Is that correct?
So to go through the whole budget evolution, I mean, there's $500,000 just in the fleet vehicles, bringing back the motor pool. I mean, there's a lot of, our net result was pretty similar to a flat budget, but there's a lot of differences in this budget than what we did previous year. And that's through the department
I guess
heads.
what I'm getting at is that when the administration brought forth that budget that had a projected deficit, council asked the administration to look again and bring us something else. And we have historically under-anticipated revenue. And then we end up with money in the bank, which is awesome. I would like to see us spend some of that money in the bank on building the value in our organization. And I absolutely agree about efficiencies, and I would be very interested in seeing the administration bring us proposed cuts. I think that is the fair and equitable, we are not in the position to be making all the recommendations. I would like to see some recommendations from administration for how to get us to the 65th percentile. And then I believe that with some of those, that we can get there in terms of these salaries.
So I have a question for you, just to clarify. So you're saying use budget reserves that we already have and cuts?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Singh.
I just have a kind of an operational question here. So are we going to, do we have to address the budget right now to do something with this?
So we're going to revisit the budget for capital in February. That will require restating our budget overall. So when we go through that evolution and have some significant modifications and revise the CIP, making a change to personnel and these types of incremental budgets, we will do those almost like a mid-year budget restatement. We don't necessarily have to do those now, we could do them at that point.
And that's, in relation to implementing something off of this, is what I'm getting at.
So you're saying, yeah, we have to have the projected costs to cover our budget should it hit.
Right.
I think with the budget savings and the vacancies and all of that, I don't think we're gonna fulfill the budget we have on right now.
Wait, can you help me when you say the word fulfill? I don't know.
So
what it means.
so we budget for things, it doesn't mean that we're spending 100% of the allocated funds. We may, with the cost savings and vacancies and things, I mean, the benefits and the PERS cost for each FTE, so if you have 3 or 4, right now we have 5 vacancies over 6 months, that's a lot of money if you look at, the match.
So I have one thing to say about cuts. So we could cut our budget so much where the only thing in our budget is salaries. So when we say cuts, we're also saying cuts to the services to the public. So we have to be careful about that. There's been a hand in the back.
Yeah, I don't like the word cuts, but one thing I've noticed, and I'm getting back to this chart here, is the fact that the harbor is an enterprise fund, and our assistants, administrative, misnamed, they're misnamed for sure. But they are one grade above seasonal. So I've got to put emphasis on some of these people that literally see thousands of paying customers face to face every year. And it's an enterprise fund, and yet they're one of the lowest paid people in the city. So some of these things have to be addressed, and I think we're being handcuffed by the name of these employees as administrative assistant. So some of these things do have to be changed, and we've seen some of the parts of the budgets. There are places that can be rounded off a little bit and steered in that direction.
So you need from us tonight somewhat of a recommendation on which pay range to pursue. And then also, if we want to look at a staged increase, and it sounds like there's some council members that would like to see how we're going to match that with the budget. Councilmember Osenko.
That was it.
Okay, so I'm just trying to get what you need. Is that a good?
So I'll bring back to you a proposal. And in doing so, I also want to remind you that this was all stemmed from the APA and the negotiation. Obviously, hopefully I can work and we can come to some solutions on those specifics. And again, Joellen is available and she's been a great resource, so I don't want to go into this blind and just do things. I want it to be well thought out and articulated. I think I have enough direction. I mean, obviously, we don't want to vote and make decisions in the work session, but I think I feel where you're coming from and how we want to cover those things, and I think that's manageable.
Vice Mayor?
You mentioned with the APA, so does this reflect talks with them? Or
So this is,
those talks are coming?
so we still need to engage and talk about specifics and how that tier and the plan applies. I think, obviously Joellen is our consultant and worked on the study, and I don't want to, I have not moved or implied changes to this study. Just like we talked about, I think we might talk about specifics and then refer to her how we look at that. I didn't want to manipulate any of that, and specifically we talked to her about the administrative positions, and she did look at the job and kind of reclassify some of those as to what they do. I don't want to talk about those specifically, but that was examined, and I see that in the data and the actuals. So I think we've captured that. I would hope that satisfies those that need to have that bump. Tough.
In the back?
One thing that just keeps coming back to me from the very beginning, what Miss Ann said and what you also said, Mayor, is that the contractor didn't receive all job descriptions or all surveys. because, I mean, we were required to do both in my department, and I believe all the other departments. So I would just want to know, and I don't know if I can, know how many job descriptions you didn't receive, and why, because we should have job descriptions for every job that's in the city. You know, so I just would like some follow-up on that. Like, can we determine right now or later on, there were 10 job descriptions that weren't given? Or there were 30 surveys that weren't given?
Joellen, did you even look at, I don't mean it flippant like this, but did you look at job descriptions and surveys, or potentially just the surveys? And do you know if you received everything or if you didn't get any from some departments? I guess it's a little like asking what check hasn't been cashed, but,
Right, I brought a lot of the information home with me tonight that, literally I'm just pulling a book for the interviews, and I can't say that we didn't receive a lot of them. We got a lot of information, so I guess unless people feel like they didn't give them to us, I don't know what we were missing.
okay.
So I know that we had a lot of information, so I don't have everything in front of me, and I have to work with the city to determine what we didn't receive, but I know that when we start a study, it's very important for us to receive a lot of information, including the existing job description. So I'm not sure why the city's saying we didn't get a lot of that, because I know we have a lot of that information. I'm just looking at it.
Go ahead, Brenda.
I wonder how the job descriptions are used in the analysis.
Yeah, I'm sorry, that was kind of the first. Did you use those job descriptions, or did you rely on the surveys?
So the way that we do the study is the purpose of well, not the purpose, but part of the benefit of doing something like this is to update the job description. So we get the existing job description from the city, and then we ask the employees, what are you doing now? And so depending on what they tell us, then we make a recommendation for a compensation or a classification plan based on what we're hearing from people. So the job description is a tool, but really this study allows us to learn a little bit more about how you're doing your work today. So it's a tool, it's not the be-all, end-all. So we don't base our recommendation on the existing job description. Rather, we look at that, we take it into account, we ask the employees what they're doing today, and then we make our recommendation based on that.
Okay, thank you for that clarification.
I would disclose that I did complete some of them, but they were generally department heads that were not available, like the police chief.
Yeah,
and the data doesn't really show that's a problem.
No, thank you. Public.
We did have employees who had concerns with how their JQs were scored versus what they put in. That has happened several times. Meaning they put down that, I should be at 560 or whatever, and they came back with like 430, something like that too, so.
Yeah, I mean, again, everyone thinks that, which I think that I do more than anyone else in the whole world. So, I mean, it is hard to, I mean, everyone. So I know there's going to be a lot of those. Yes, Annie?
I do have one question. I worked in classifications for the state of Alaska, and there was with the questionnaires and surveys that we do when we're looking at a job position description, and we're going through with an employee, we call it an audit or an edit, a desk audit basically. What do you do? We take that information in, but we always go to the department head, their direct supervisor or the director of the department for a second confirmation that they didn't leave anything out, because what we have found is people don't always articulate what they do, and it doesn't always make it onto paper. So I was curious if there was a second level check done to these questionnaires. That's my question.
Joellen, did you hear that question?
Yes, I did. And so, yes, our job analysis actually has 3 components. The first component is the employee's perception of his or her own work. So we ask all of your employees to fill out a job analysis questionnaire, which is their perception of what they're doing today. So that's why if there's a job description or not, we want to know what's happening today. So the second part of it is the supervisor's perception of the employee's work. So at the end of the questionnaire, there's a place for the supervisor to comment on whether or not they agreed with what the employee said. And we don't share that with employees because it's separate. You know, so sometimes the supervisor might say, you know, so-and-so is not giving themselves enough credit for what they do. You know, the level of education needs to be higher, or they have more contact with people than what they're saying. And then the third component is our perception. So that's why we came to Seward, we met with the employees, and we listened to what they had to say. So we read the existing job description, we looked at their questionnaire, we read the supervisor's comments, and then we met with the employee. And as a result of that, that's how we came up with our recommendations. So yes, the supervisor comments came into consideration.
Okay, thank you. So, just looking at the city manager, you feel like you have enough direction to bring something back to council?
I do, you know, this is kind of a weird question, and maybe it'd be better to talk to the city attorney, but, so I was wanting to talk to the APA representative, so Annie, but I don't know, you know, kind of, generally I don't just sit, you know, personnel evaluations, pay increases, that's usually of a somewhat confidential nature. And I don't know, kind of like, I feel like it would be so much easier if her and I would look at the data, but I don't want to jeopardize, you know, the employee relations, but I also feel like, you know, when you see it, it really kind of helps sell what is going on with all of this. And Joellen, do you have any kind of a directive for me in that? I know you do a lot of negotiation and a lot of these things with union. Would you warn me to?
Yeah, I think, I'm sorry, my dog is getting a little fancy right now. I'm happy to work with you and work with the union, you know, to make sure that you guys have all the information that you need in order to move forward. You know, the study is what it is, and like we talked about before, if something has been misclassified and there's more information that we need to take into consideration, we can do that. So I think offline we can talk about that and find out, you know, I know there were some emails that went back and forth, but if we can find out what the issues are and then we can speak to that, I think that's fine. You know, I'm happy to help with that.
Okay.
That sounds
Thank you.
good. Well, Joellen, let me just say I really appreciate it. You know, having you, I know, rehash your presentation, but it's just made such a big difference now that we have all this data in front of us. So thank you for redoing some and talking about what you've already presented on. That was very helpful.
Well, I'm happy to do it. It's your study, and, you know, I'm hoping that you'll implement it because I think that you learned a lot, and, you know, you have the information, and maybe something can be tweaked a little bit, and we'll work on that if we need to.
And then I'll look to the public. Are there any final comments from the public? Thank you all for being here. That was very helpful. I'll look to the dais. Are there any final comments from the dais? Councilmember Lane, you look like you're...
I do. I want our employees to know out there that we as a council value them greatly, and we'd like to know how we can implement this study or portions thereof in a way that will support the culture of valuing our employees.
Thank you. Are there any other comments on the dais? Councilmember, or I'm sorry, Vice Mayor?
Only that this was very useful. I mean, when we had the presentation before, it just kind of went like that. But now we've got something concrete to begin doing something with. So really appreciate the work session.
City Clerk, did you have any final comments?
No, thank you.
Okay, thank you. City Manager?
No, I think Councilmember Lane kind of hit on it. It's like our most valuable asset is our people. And investing and retaining them is important. And making them acknowledged and feel gainful employment, right? I mean, most people don't always leave because of money. A lot of times they leave because of the way they feel perceived. And so we try to work on those things in addition to these types of things. But it takes council support, it takes management support, and we're a team in all the parts. I think doing this is a great eye-opener, and hopefully, you know, we can't always make every single person happy, but I would like to think that we're going to improve the quality for all of our employees as a whole. And I think we'll work through those issues that I've heard and that we've looked at, and I look forward to bringing back some good, solid recommendations, and we'll get those addressed.
Great, thank you.
I
Councilman.
take that back.
Yes, please.
If there is an opportunity for a review of a particular job, I would love to throw my staff in there.
Okay.
In the review of their job descriptions and maybe review the questionnaires in the way that they were completed.
Okay, so let's, you know, I named a couple, like patrol officer I think was mentioned, the harbor was repeated, not, you know, those admin assistants, not just from the harbor, but a couple other departments. And then if the clerk could have a chance to have those reviewed one more time, I think would be great. Okay, good. So before I dismiss, I might just, and people can roll their eyes at me, but I might just say, so we have all of council here. We have a half hour before our regular meeting. I just want us to be very careful about Open Meetings Act and not chit-chat about, and the clerk is smiling and laughing too. It might be overdoing it, but I just wanted to throw that out there so that just we're very careful between.
Once we're adjourned.
Yeah, once we're adjourned. So if there's no further for the order, I'll adjourn the work session. Thank you.
Thank you, Joellen.
Adjourned at 5:30.